I had the major label deal and I had those successes. But what happens when that starts to go away?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yes.
When what you do is stripped away or at least significantly diminished.
Yes. Don't you think that's the identity crisis of what can be taken away versus what cannot be taken away?
Right.
Hey, welcome to the Found podcast. I'm Lorie Hartshorn, and I'm so glad that you're joining us. We're having a great time over here. Actually, over here is actually right in my home. So I'm welcoming you into my home to have this conversation that actually is a follow-up from my book, Found. Some of you might have read it already. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to get a copy. But we're just meeting some people and hearing some real life stories and examples of what it actually means when we say yes to following Jesus and all that's available to us. And today, man, you're going to be seriously a superstar. In my books anyway, and in a lot of people's minds. Mark Masri, he's a Canadian singer, songwriter, producer. I just learned recently he's now teaching music. Of course, he probably always did that. He's a Juno-nominated artist, TV host with 100 Huntley Street. Mark and I have a lot in common. And he's a member of the platinum-selling award-winning group, the Tenors. Now, how cool is that? Mark's just a great guy. And he's real, and he's my friend, and he's here today. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Lorie.
How's that for an intro?
That's a mouthful.
Well, you got a lot going on in your life, Mark. I can hardly keep up with all the stuff that you do.
It's funny. People say, what don't you do? I often describe it this way. In the fact that I get bored easily, so I need to have...
Is it ADD?
It's kind of a form of ADD. I get bored very easily, so I have to have a number of things to be doing to keep me on my toes and keep me sharp.
You know what? I love it. I love how you use your gifts. I mean, just right out the top, your voice is amazing. What a gift.
Thank you.
Have you always loved music?
Always. My mom says before I could form words, I was singing melodies, properly and accurately. So that's always been a part. I remember, my dad was pastoring a church, and I don't know how I can remember this, but I do. I would have been 4-ish at the time, maybe even 3. And I would just take one of the utensils that she had in the drawer that she would use for cooking, and I would go over to the Chesterfield, because that's what we called it back in the day, a Chesterfield. It's a couch. Yeah. And I'd plug it into the cushions, and it became my makeshift microphone. So I was doing that from a very young age before I could even form words.
Amazing. So. And I mean, now it's pretty amazing. You're traveling with the Tenors all over the world.
Yeah.
Tell us what that's like.
Oh, it's super exciting. We're 2.5 years now, although I have had a bit of a history with the guys in that I would substitute every now and again. If one of the guys... their wives were having babies, or they were ill, or, over the course of 10 years, I would drop in once in a blue moon to try to cover off for one of them because, the show must go on in Tenors land. But as of 2.5 years, they invited me to come on full time because Fraser was deciding to retire from the Tenors. His wife had just had their 3rd daughter, and so he wanted to be home a bit more, and they had Kelly, she's a wonderful artist as well, his wife. They had some creative things that they wanted to do together. So
cool. And
it was a perfect season in my life because Lucas had just gone, we have one son, my wife and I. He had just gone off to university, studying economics at Queen's.
Wow.
I don't know where he got the economics bug from. He didn't get it from me.
That's cool.
But so
maybe it's from Angela. We'll give her the credit.
We're going to give her the credit for the numbers.
Yeah.
She is definitely the bean counter in our family.
Is she? So, and you're the creative soul, right?
Yeah. So it was perfect timing. God's timing, awesome. Actually.
And you're doing 100 Huntley Street. I mean, that's what we have in common. I was the 700.
You were the 700.
Canada, and you were the 100.
Yeah, you're the upgraded. You're the upgraded. Well, I'm just the 100. You're the 700.
I don't know.
But loving my time with Huntley Street. So, for people that are watching now may not know that I have a bit of a history with the ministry in that many years ago, between 97 and 2003, I was the music producer for the show. Right. So I've had this long-standing relationship with the ministry Crossroads as a whole, and specifically 100 Huntley Street. But when they asked me to come back on and consider hosting, it really caught me off guard at first, Lorie. I hadn't really ever considered going back in any capacity, not because I didn't love what Huntley is all about and what it represents, but just in the hosting capacity, it was a real surprise.
How did that feel to you when you first stepped in that hosting
Oh
chair?
my gosh, it's scary. I mean, you're asking the questions. So you've got all the pressures on you, right? It was,
Yeah.
but I love it. It was daunting at first.
Yeah.
But realizing that we're all just communicators, like
Yeah.
whether you're standing on a stage singing a song, you're leading worship, you're whatever it is you find yourself doing in the space of public address, it's communication, and that's what broadcasting is. That's what hosting is. So, or helping to set the table or create a bit of a platform for someone to tell their story is just part of. I think for those of us that are communicators, we do that every day. We ask people questions about their life. It's just who we are.
Yeah.
So I should say early winter of 2020, before the world shut down, they approached me about coming on board as one of the permanent hosts. And by the time we got all the paperwork done and I'd come and gotten things lined up, the world shut down. So
you were stuck at home like
I was
me?
stuck at home. They sent me home.
We were doing TV from home?
We were doing TV from home. They sent me home with a camera, some lighting.
I know.
Find yourself a perfect spot. And we had the crew get online with us. Remember, everything was done on Zoom.
I know.
So we got a nice little set happening and lighting was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so I hosted from home for, I think, 4 months. But I'm so thankful, actually, because it was a great place for me to cut my teeth.
Okay.
In terms of, getting comfortable with people, because I was only getting comfortable with them I only had to get comfortable with them on screen and ask questions. And you could always stop and I could ask a question again and we could get them to answer it again. Like a lot was done in post.
Right.
Whereas when you're in studio, in this environment, like everything's recorded.
Yeah.
Everything's going live to tape.
Yeah.
You just really don't stop.
By the way, we're not editing at all here, Mark. Anything you say, there's no cuts.
All right,
okay?
there's no cuts.
There's no post.
Okay,
there is a Cam, our producer, there's a bit of post. But the fact is, I know what you mean. The in-person, even the intimacy of the studio, and then all the contraptions that are happening in the studio around you can be very distracting.
Yeah. Or you're getting, and with Huntley Street when we're in production in studio, we've got IFBs, so you're getting time cues in your ear, or you're being told we need to throw to this now, or add the live element to it. Because when we are in telethon, it's live, across the country. There is truly no stopping.
Yeah.
If you're going live to tape and you really make a major flub, you can stop and recue. Yeah. But not when you're live to air.
Yeah. And think of the years. That's all they did was live TV. I mean, is that crazy?
You think of the hosts over the years.
I know.
The talents, the ability to be able to do that.
We both have a great appreciation for that. So we got Mark the singer. We've got Mark the TV host. Mark the music teacher. Now, you're teaching at college level down at Canada Christian College. You're teaching songwriting there. Mark the performer. Oh, wait, there's Mark the realtor. Because there's another thing that you do.
Yeah, that's right. It's crazy. I think if you were to ask which one of these things don't belong, it's probably Mark the realtor.
Oh, okay.
But no, I love it though. But yes, Mark the realtor. Okay,
so we're talking about identity, Mark, because my book, it's really all about my book, It's not really about...
I know.
In my book, I share about 8 or 9 stories, a lot of my own story, but a lot of people's stories and their journey of really asking, who am I and what is my purpose? So when you look back at yourself as this young boy who loved to sing, who put grab the wooden spoon or whatever the contraption was, who were you as a young boy? How would you define yourself? What was your characteristics like? And was there anything about growing up, in your growing up story, that maybe there was some pinnacle points that really defined you?
Yeah. Well, the discovery that I could sing and even harmonize with my mother at a very young age kind of made me a bit of a novelty, I suppose.
Yeah.
In those early years, my dad was pastoring churches, but every now and again, my mom and I would go out and sing at other churches if we weren't singing at the church Dad was pastoring at. Yeah. And so there's that novelty, component to it. And it was great, and I loved singing with my mother. She has a beautiful voice. She was one of the Masters Trio back in the day.
Wow.
Eventually, I grew out of duets with her, not of my own doing, but because she was just trying to mother 5 other children, because I'm the eldest of 6.
You're the eldest of 6?
Yeah, I'm the eldest of 6.
There's a new information. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm the eldest of 6.
Wow.
And so she just had other concerns, obviously.
So are you like the typical eldest that you're responsible? and sort of took care of the others somewhat?
Yeah, that overachieving.
I know that's
people-pleasing.
stereotyping.
No, it is, but it is kind of true. And the fact that you're the eldest, there's more responsibility placed on you. And I was almost the third parent in the home, and so there was that aspect of sort of there was that role that I played in the family. The overachiever, want people to like you, people pleasing, all that stuff, which comes with its own baggage, right? Because that starts to play into your adult life if you don't deal with that. Which I've certainly had my share of years working through that.
Tell us more about that, because I think a lot of people can relate to that, like people pleasing. I mean, especially those of us who are performers. If you
so
know
much about like me, it's so much about like me, especially if you're on stage. And then it's compounded with the fact that you're a child performer. It's almost starting you off on the wrong foot, if you will, because you get so much accolade and recognition and acknowledgement for what you do that you start to tie your identity to that. And so what happens when you go through a season, which maybe we'll get to in a few minutes, where the music started to simmer down and it started to go away, and trends in music, because I went on to write songs and record albums with Universal, and I had the major label deal and I had those successes. But what happens when that starts to go away? Who are you? When what you do is stripped away, or at least significantly diminished for whatever reason, market trends, whatever's happening in the business. Or you're just not the flavor that people are enjoying at that particular point in time. You have to really, and I went through a major sort of, I'll call it an identity crisis, if you will. Just toward the end of my first tenure at Crossroads, because they were going through some restructuring and they were phasing out the music producer portfolio, which is all happens. I get it. There was going to be
your first time at Crossroads.
My first time at Crossroads. David Maines, our wonderful founder, love David and Norma Jean, was going to be retiring. There was some new leadership stepping in. I believe Ron was going to be taking over. So the ministry was going through a lot of changes. And with that came some structural changes to the Huntley production group specifically. And so I was no longer Mark Masri, the producer of Huntley Street, the music producer of Huntley Street. And with that, there was a certain amount of identity, connected to. And so now I'm home and I'm trying to figure out what was next. And I was working on a new album. So I was thinking, okay, Lord, maybe this is your way of saying now the music is going to become, like my music is going to become the full-time thing. And I was playing for major record companies, in LA and New York, and working with an incredible production team. And the bottom fell out of the music industry. So at the same time, Lorie, it was remarkable. My first time with Crossroads, graciously, they offered me a severance package, which was beautiful, I'll tell you, it was November the 30th, 2003. That very day was the same day that an 18-month production deal that I had signed with a very hotshot producer and a manager who happened to be my lawyer as well. It also came to a close on November the 30th.
Oh, my.
In 2003. And so I was left December the 1st, 2003, wondering, what's next? My severance has run out. I thought it was going to be this record company. We still hadn't signed a deal. We hadn't signed a major deal. So things were hanging in the balance because the record industry was going through massive changes and the bottom was falling. And just when you thought you'd hit bottom, something worse would happen, and people that loved you, at the major labels that said, we're going to sign it, within a week they were losing their jobs because their company had been bought out by a bigger company, so they no longer had a job. They were redundant. So it was just like, what is going on here? And yet, prayerfully, I had to ask the Lord, because this production company begged and pleaded for me to sign an extension. I was totally within my contractual right to walk away. And I just really felt like the Lord said, cut the rope.
Really?
And I was like,
ooh, that let go of the rope moment. Oh.
Really? And I'm not dealing with a bunch of believers here. This was a mainstream record I was recording. And they were still very, very sympathetic and to my beliefs and knowing that I was feeling God was telling me to do this. But even as I'm telling them, I'm not totally believing it myself, but just trying to walk in obedience, which I haven't always done. This is not Mark, the great obedient child of God. I struggle like everyone else, but this is one time where I felt like I heard God's voice and I responded. And so it started me on this journey of reconnecting with the Lord and digging down on identity and coming to the realization through a very painful process that was probably a year and a half, if I'm being honest, after that, where I really had to identify as a child of God and being loved and favored and chosen and valued by him, even when I wasn't doing anything exceptional.
Wow.
Even when I wasn't leading worship on big stages or, signed to massive record deals or acting as a music producer for the number one Christian talk show in the country at that point. And we were live for an hour format on Global, which was a massive, commercial television station.
Yes.
And just realizing that God loved me the same, regardless of what I found myself doing. And so the beautiful thing about 2004 was that Lucas came along.
Wow.
So he was, I think, part of what sustained me through that, since that transition through that season of trying to figure out, God, what's next?
Yeah.
Right? So fatherhood is what came next.
Which is another whole beautiful identity. When I hear you, wow, I didn't know all that, Mark. It's so easy, isn't it? And I share this in my book, a lot of my own story, too, is we get defined by what we do, especially to those of us who are doers, are performers, and maybe have received a lot of praise or accolades, as you say, that reaffirmed your identity. Because identity is really that place where we feel valued and worthy. We feel safe and secure.
Right.
So we place our identity in those things. And when the rug is pulled out from under us, like you just described, who is Mark Masri now? And what would he do with his life? So you really turned to the Lord at that point. You knew the Lord as a young boy?
I did. I grew up and made a decision, do I have a specific date? It was, for me, it was a journey, but there was definitely a decision made on my part. There was, a deciding within myself that this is not just a faith that's being, that I will inherit from my parents. Right. It needs to be my own decision.
Right.
And it was probably in my, preteen years where I really, I'd made a decision to follow Christ as a young child, but in the age 12, 13, 14, where I started connecting with my peers as it related to our faith, through youth group and being on retreats and conventions and seeing the power of God at work in their lives and experiencing it in my own, that decision was solidified. Right. Yeah. So there was never really a walking away for me, although some of my other siblings, still to this day, I pray for them. Yeah. But for me, God was my source. Yeah. But it didn't mean that I wasn't going to go through a bit of a shakeup and a bit of a trial and a testing. Yeah. Because up to that point, it had kind of been, I hate to put it this way, Lorie, but it was kind of easy peasy for me. Like I'd gone from music pastoring at a church in East Toronto to being offered this role for almost 6 years as a music producer. And I recorded my first album, which managed to get a Juno nomination that first year, a gospel album, which was wonderful. It was self-titled. It was my first album. I was so excited. I'd worked with some great producers and had written some originals on that album. So everything was kind of like, I hate to use the expression easy peasy, but it had been up to that point. I hadn't really had my world rocked up until, the end of 2003.
And really, that's what happens. We go through, maybe it's called an identity test. Yeah. Our world gets rocked, the rug gets pulled out from under, and we realize that we were actually putting a lot of our security and our, identity, our formation was secured in something that actually could be taken away from us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when that happens and you realize, oh, shoot, like I can lose that job. Oh, the record deals aren't working out. Oh, like any of this could go away.
Mm-hmm.
Any of this could go away at any moment. Don't you think that's the identity crisis of what can be taken away versus what cannot be taken away?
Right.
So I hear you saying like, you already followed God, but your faith changed. Something changed in you. Something shifted in you, in your relationship with God. Would you say that's true?
Oh, for sure. My dependence on him went from 0 to 100 overnight. Like it had to, because now we're talking about the financial well-being of my family now.
Right.
Because now we've got a little one. Now, my wife Angela, had worked all along, but with that, there comes some struggles. Our marriage was tested.
Right.
Because
she's paying the bills.
She's oftentimes paying the bills, and was very successful at what she did. But it didn't make me feel like I was adding value to the family, and I was fulfilling my end of the bargain as the man of the home.
Right.
And so that created, I would say, a season of growth in our marriage that lasted many years, because then I went on to see some success.
Yeah.
And so after, writing one specific song for a charity organization called It's About the Child, which we know him very well, Brian Warren's organization.
Right.
And then it teamed, I happened to get teamed up with this incredible film score guy in Toronto by the name of Jack Lenz. And he heard the song and he got behind Brian's organization, funded the production of the song. We filmed a music video. And that started my relationship with Jack, which thrust me into a world of working with him in some film and television for a number of years, doing some score stuff. Yeah. And then he funded a couple of albums for me. So that got me back in the game, if you will. And I started making music that was probably a little bit more true to who I was stylistically. Like that album that I tried to shop when the industry tanked, was an experiment. It was like Mark Masri, like not singing morally compromising music, but it was Mark doing the Justin Timberlake vibe. Like it was a very R&B, rhythmic,
the
pop.
Love songs.
The love stuff, very pop, very current. The sound was very edgy, and it was great. I mean, to this day, I go back and I listen to those tracks. It was great music, but it
wasn't really the true Mark.
It wasn't really
It wasn't
me.
what
It wasn't
you
the
really cared about.
stirring, inspiring, big ballads with beautiful top lines. And you know what I mean when I say top lines, Lorie, with the lush orchestrations and the stuff that just, makes me want to cry, even if I don't hear anyone singing. Just the music, the score. So that started me on a
take
journey.
me back to this moment. You're going through this really marital, crisis in many ways. We've all been there. And it tests you at, who you are as a dad, who you are as a provider. Is that when there was some part of your story where you actually took a job in a bank?
Yeah.
Just to help provide for your family. Was that in that same season?
That would have been, so I was I would say I was out of that sort of, we'll call it identity crisis season. But yes, as I got into this new relationship and started recording albums and even had some of the albums signed, had about 5 of the albums signed with a big label and started touring and working with some bigger artists, like touring with Jim Brickman, who's a big piano artist in the US. I started to see some success. So those were good years. But I don't know if I'd really resolved this idea that I might have to go through a season where saying no to music was going to be imperative.
Right.
And so that sort of came back around.
Wow.
This season where it was like, okay, things were changing in the industry. And you're doing everything that you can to try and salvage this project, or you tape this television special, or I was constantly investing in something else that someone was saying, you need to do this, you need to do that, because there's so much, in many respects, there was a lot of positive hype around what I was doing and the music I was creating and writing, but it just wasn't creating opportunities for income that was going to be sustaining. So I got to the point where it got really difficult in our marriage.
A bit of the starving artist, right?
Yeah.
Which happens.
And it kind of got to the point where, my wife had to just kind of lay it on the line and say, listen, you've got to make a decision, because I can't continue to go on like this. Because she knew the type of man that it made me when I really wasn't living up to my full potential in terms of my responsibilities to the family.
Yeah.
And so, an opportunity, I got my securities license, an opportunity to go into the bank and work with, one of the top 4 in the country.
Yeah.
Became a financial services advisor. And
were you dying inside? Or was it I guess it's another part of me. Like what, how did that feel to you?
It was a little bit of death.
Yeah.
I think. But I went in and still had a great experience. And it was just another world for me to let my light shine, and made some great friendships that I have to this day. In fact, the manager that hired me and one of my other colleagues, Mohammed, we stay in touch to this day, and none of us work for the bank anymore. But I've been able to be a light in their world, which I'm thankful to God for that. Yeah. But there was a part of me when you're going into the branch every day, and you're like thinking of like, what am I doing here?
Hey friends, thanks so much for joining me on this journey of Found. Now the podcast, it's an extension, of course, of the book Found. There's a video series. This message of identity and purpose, I just want to share it so that we all know not only who we are, but what God has called us to. And I hope that you're finding it encouraging today. Would you do me a favor? We'd love for more people to be on this journey of Found. Subscribe on the podcast or the YouTube channel, Lorie Hartshorn. You can find me at Lorie Hartshorn in all places, social media as well. How about make a comment? I'd love to hear from you. Send me your thoughts, your questions. We'll continue the conversation together. But thanks for joining me on this journey of Found, and please share it with others. Now back to the conversation. Well, you're defined, your identity's really up to this point in your story, as I hear it, very much defined by artist, by creative, by the contributor that, you've spent years now, and your soul, it's part of your soul. It's part of the way God has wired you.
Yeah.
Like it's not just, our identity isn't just the things, as we both know. We can do a lot of things, but in doing those things, if it's not actually the way God has wired you and put this passion within you, you can only do them for so long.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And then you've hit that place where it's like, but who is God truly made me be? And the connection between identity and purpose is so connected. It's like knowing who you are leads to a much more deeper, fulfilling purpose. But it doesn't mean that you don't go work at the bank sometimes, or you don't go do that job for the sake of being provider for your family and being a good dad and a good husband, right?
Yeah, and modeling that. Because at this point, my son is at the age where I want him to see a dad that goes out and will do what he needs to do to provide for his family, regardless of where his gifts may be or where he's experienced success in the past.
Right.
Because Lucas was around long enough to see that. He was around during some of those years of success, and where, I was touring extensively and income wasn't a problem. But then there was this downward shift again, because that is artistry. It's when it rains, it pours, and and then conversely, when it's drought, like it's really dry. It's
and I'm sure you've seen a lot of artists in the professional world that you have lived in that. But what do they do? What do they turn to when it goes dry? And then we hear all the stories. Yeah. Right.
Tragic stories.
Tragic stories of multiple relationships, drugs, alcohol, whatever this. Why didn't you ever go that way?
Just to meditate.
Do you think it was your faith? Do you think, what is it that held you strong?
It has to be. It has to be my faith.
Yeah.
Where I can't explain it any other way, because there's so many reasons for why those artists, and I'm not talking just even artists in the mainstream space, but even Christian artists, turn to substance or behavior addictions to try and numb that lack of feeling fulfilled or having what they feel is a purpose. Yeah. And you can understand why they go there. Just try to make that feeling go away.
Yeah, 100%.
I just have to say, but for the grace of God, He sustained me and kept me through that. And not that it's always been perfect, but it's certainly been His grace that's been more than sufficient, and we've seen it. And my wife, Angela, and I, we've been married just over 27 years. And
Awesome.
we just, daily I pray, this is usually how I pray. I said, Lord, for all the reasons that our marriage should have been and that's what I do, because I think the Lord understands what that means.
Yeah.
I said, you have made a miracle out of it.
That's amazing.
And you continue to make a miracle out of it. Even now in these days where it's a little more steady and predictable, if you will, I still have been around long enough to know, Lorie, that all of that can go away. And there was a real transformation that happened to me while I was at the bank.
Oh, what happened?
I got to the point where I had to get to the point where I was like, Lord, and it took me a long time to get there. Trust me, Lorie, it was a battle. Mm-hmm. I had to say, Lord, if I never step on the stage again, I'm honestly okay. And I had just kind of said that in word.
Yeah.
A couple of attempts leading up to.
Yeah.
But I really did get to the point where my heart was so at peace. I was like, I want peace in my home.
Yeah.
I want my son to see dad at home. I want my wife to have a husband that she knows he feels fulfilled because he's living out his purpose as her husband and as a father. Right. It doesn't matter what he's doing, because Ange doesn't care what I do.
Yeah.
She really doesn't. She loves me for who I am.
And our kids are the same.
And our kids, they don't care what
They're
you
not
do.
that impressed.
No, they're not. They're really not.
Yeah, I know.
And I got to that point where I was able to say, Lord, I am so at peace with this. Yeah, I mean, like I said, some days I'd go into that branch and be like, what am I doing here? But still able to find those moments of joy and moments of fulfillment, and realizing that there was a purpose for me to be here.
Yeah.
I'm having impact. I'm being able to speak into people's lives that I wouldn't otherwise have access to or have a relationship with.
Yeah.
And so when I came out of the bank, because of the real estate thing really started to explode for me, and there was going to be an issue with me banking and being a realtor, that there was an issue there. So it was just an easy decision for me to take the road of real estate, which was going to free up a bit more time for me, because some music opportunities were starting to present themselves again. So it's interesting and I tell people this, God gives us a gift, and we do this for so long, thinking we've got to protect it and hold on to it and keep it safe, even from him.
Yeah.
Like I felt like almost like I needed, and he was trying to pry it out of my hands for years. Better part of 10 years, Lorie. And when he finally got my hands open and said, God, honestly, it's yours. I don't even care. I really can say, I don't care if I sing another note. I've had incredible experiences. I've graced the stage with some incredible people, the best of the best. Honestly, I've got artist friends that would give body parts to do some of the stuff that I've done.
Yeah.
And they're still going for it. I'm so at peace with it.
Wow.
And so I get back into the real estate world. And then Huntley presents itself as an option as an opportunity to host. And I'm like, well, this is kind of interesting, Lord. I didn't see this coming, but I get it. It's communication. I have a heart for the ministry. Mm-hmm. I am a communicator in a sense. Yeah. So I thought this is an interesting new spin on communication. And then within 2 years of that, the tenors come back to me and said, we've always thought that if anyone leaves, you're the guy to step in.
Wow.
And I went home. I had dinner with the manager that night. And Ange goes, his name's Jeffrey. Okay. She knew in her heart what it was. She goes, what did Jeffrey want? I said, you know what he wanted. You know what he wanted. I said, Fraser's going to take a back seat. He's retiring, and they're looking for me to substitute. She goes, I knew it. And I said, yeah, but why would I do that? I asked Ange and Lucas, I can remember coming home that day, and I said, why would I do that? This is so good. This is so comfortable what we have now.
Yeah.
I'm loving Huntley. I mean, like 2 days a week. It's a commute to Burlington, but big deal.
Yeah.
Real estate, I was having a blockbuster year in real estate. Like God was just blessing, right? No concerns in that regard. And Ange goes, you would be crazy not to. Don't you see how the Lord has brought you all this way to give you back something that's precious to you? And so, and I grappled with it for the better part of a month before I even responded. And I'd be downstairs working on something because I have a little makeshift studio in the basement. I'd come up and said, guys, are we sure? Like, this had to be a family decision. I said, are we sure? Because just because it's the tenors, they've got a lot of successes, but they're going to go through the same peaks and valleys and seasons of plenty and seasons where it's not quite so plenty. Like, you got to understand that's part of it. And so it was a family decision for me to step back into the arena.
Thanks for sharing all that. I just see so many links in your story that even though most of us haven't lived the life you've lived, Mark, there comes a moment where we have to lay down
Yeah.
the thing that's defined us, the thing that we've held on, as you say, so tightly that I will not be okay somehow if I can't do this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when the Lord uses lots of different ways of really getting it out of our hands. I share in one of my chapters of my book, I share the story of, because a lot of my history is music. I did tons of singing. I was a music teacher, performance. Like it was just, I thought I would be in live theater all my life. Like that was kind of one avenue I was possibly pursuing until I lost my voice. I went to university in the States. I don't even know if you know this part of my story, but I went to university to be a music major, and I really had dreams of being in musical theater, and I lost my voice, Mark. And this was the first week of school. I couldn't even make the choir. Like, I could not sing. Now, fast forward, what happened is I had developed nodules through live theater, over performing, over singing. And as you know, when you have nodules, it's a long road to recovery. But who was I now but this washed up singer who I was figured my whole career would head that way. And then it was actually just taken away from me. What was the point in getting a music degree and performance degree if you couldn't sing?
Right.
I really went through a crisis then, because who was I if I couldn't sing?
Yeah.
And, it's just like we have a very similar story how the Lord, yes, that was taken away for a time. I had a supernatural healing 9 years later, supernatural healing of my voice that led to open doors and back into music in different ways. But I honestly can say when you're being defined by it, maybe I was holding on to that so tightly, I'm not realizing it. When it was let go, it allowed me to see other parts of me that I probably would have never known had I not released it.
Yeah. It's so true.
And those other parts of me, like for you, the banking, the real estate, you may have never pursued that had you just held on to Mark, the singer, right?
Right.
And how
even
God
teaching. Like I didn't really have aspirations to teach. Like if you'd asked me 10 years ago, what do you think about teaching? I'd say, I'm an awful teacher. I just don't have patience. I don't know how to. And I love it now.
Yeah.
And I think, I think we were talking about this earlier, or maybe it was in some of your communication with me prior to this interview, just talking about what would happen if I lost my voice.
Yeah.
I think that's what is so beautiful about being able to teach is you get to empower the next generation of communicators and songwriters and singers. And that's what I'm loving about this. So if I woke up tomorrow and I couldn't sing, there would be a bit of shell shock, obviously, for sure.
Yeah.
But I've done a lot of singing in my day.
Yeah.
A lot of singing in my day. And yes, I loved it's one of the ways that I, express myself, a significant part of who I am. But if I can empower other voices, younger voices, to be able to train up these great songwriters and to see some of the stuff that they are creating and writing, it's just like, it just blows my mind.
That's amazing. I just see it. It's just such a beautiful story of identity of, you're not defined by the thing that you do or the thing that you did. And so it's allowed God to form and shape you and grow you in other ways. Yeah. What is following the Lord then meant to you? Like, how is it shaped, Mark, to be a follower of Jesus in the music industry, in the, TV industry, in now teaching? Like, who's Mark now?
Well, Mark is a lot less driven by what it is, he may be naturally gifted to do, which wasn't always the case. I'm certainly more open to wherever God may lead, whatever he may have me doing. I just love that I have the capacity, or I'm in a season of life and maybe done enough that I can be a voice of influence. Yeah. And I don't even necessarily have to be the one that does the work, but I can just be a voice of influence or encouragement. Yeah. And we're seeing lots of, communities and gatherings and groups of people where Ange and I get to be encouragers to the next generation together. It's something we get to do together. We talked a little bit about the river off camera, and that's this beautiful worship thing that we are very, very involved with.
Yeah. And that's just for our viewers, which might be some that might be in other countries of the world, but this is probably the biggest worship gathering in Canada. Started right down here in our little city here we live in, by one of my previous students.
Yes.
Pretty cool. But the river worship connected with Canada Christian College. You're now teaching there.
Teach there.
Right?
We're starting to write songs.
God is doing amazing things
that are coming up out of the river.
Yeah.
Very likely we'll be releasing an album of originals, or at least music videos of originals in the coming year. So there's just, I stand back. I'm like, I don't have to lead at all. I love being down or standing at the back of the room and just watching all of these young people. It's actually multi-generational. It's not just even young people that come to the river worship, but just seeing all of these people unified in worship just makes me tear up. It makes me, I don't even sing. I just listen, and I just bask in people offering praise and worship to God. Yeah. Because he's the only one that's worthy, right. And we can try to do a lot of stuff. And a lot of people will tell us, oh, you're worthy and you're this and that, especially in the entertainment world. Right. And you're always being doted on and being told how great you are. Yeah. We're not. I'm not. Yeah. I'm not. I'm just to coin an old, phrase, I'm just a sinner saved by grace. And I get this privilege of being able to be part of God's ever-growing kingdom and family. Yeah. And there's so many wonderful people doing wonderful things for the kingdom, Lorie. So that's who Mark is. I'm very content to be, just stand in the background, cheer people on. We have plenty of opportunities, as tenors, to be out there singing and to be on the stage, which is fun. It has its place. I'll tell you, it's a lot less pressuresome than being a solo artist. I laugh at the guys. Sometimes they go and they're all freaked out about, my voice, this, or we have that. I'm like, guys, are you kidding me? There's 4 of us. Right. If you're having a rough night, just give me the eye and I'll take the big note. Right. And vice versa. It's like a cakewalk for me. I hate to even say it. But it's amazing. It's not even work. It's just fun, so anyways.
That's amazing. The freedom that God's given you.
Really?
Freedom. It feels
free.
Like a gift.
That would be another. That's who Mark. Okay. He's free. He's not so tied down to it having to be one way, or I'm not living my full potential, and just open to wherever God has us going. Has us planted.
Yeah. You know what? It's beautiful, Mark. Thanks for sharing your story. I think I know there's people listening that they can relate on many levels, especially in the I have to perform to be of value and worth. It's like, actually, when you let that thing go, then you become a person who sees everybody else.
Yes.
And all the opportunities. And for me, a lot of my story was I had to step away from being the performer I went into teaching.
Right.
21 years of teaching. I got to empower and pour into the next generation. I would say teaching is still my passion. Even as a TV host, it's kind of a different classroom for me. Mm-hmm. But even as I write and as I speak, it's like so much joy in knowing it isn't about what you do, but what God does through you. Right. It's so freeing to your word. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be making pizza or out with your neighbor or hanging with a friend, or I go to the gym and, you just get to be a representative of God in this world.
And when you get to do that thing, which you may be naturally gifted to do, I find I'm living in a season now where I'm enjoying it way more than I ever did when I held it so tightly.
Right.
It's like the pressure's gone. And I honestly can say, I wake up every day and I'm like, Lord, if it all goes away, if the tenors fold, or if they decide they want to go with someone, or whatever the case may be, if it just all goes away, I'm cool. I'm fine.
Well, because it doesn't define you.
It doesn't define me.
It's just something you do.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest lesson in my life too. We can do a lot of things, but they don't need to define us.
That's right.
It's just something we do. When I stepped away from 700 Club Canada after hosting, a daily TV show like you do, I just knew it was time. God gave me freedom and actually this message of identity. And it was just like, let's go. That's something I did.
Yeah.
It doesn't define me. But when Jesus defines you, Mark, there's just, the world is a much bigger place, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think your legacy is going to be? I'm sure there'll be the music that Mark's created.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful to hear the testimonials and get the DMs or, comments from people online about a song that's impacted them that perhaps you wrote or you've performed, or they were in a concert and they heard you and something you said or something, you sang really, touched them. That's a beautiful thing. I hope the legacy of Mark is richer than that, though. I hope it's just a guy that loved large, first and foremost, his God, then his family, and sought to build up those around him, and to build and to work alongside, my brothers and sisters for building the kingdom and God's church, which is growing and is just exploding, and the world needs it, needs Jesus more than ever.
Yeah.
More than ever, Lorie. We know that to be true. So.
We know that to be true. Thank you so much, Mark.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining me. I got to know a little bit more of you today, and I know you've encouraged others. So if you've been watching and listening and you're thinking, boy, I'm on a journey. Maybe you're in an identity crisis like we've both been there. Get the book Found. I know it's going to really encourage you. There's lots of stories in it, some teaching, the video series that goes along with it. But thanks for joining us today on the Found podcast. Know that you're loved, that you're seen, that God has great plans for you too. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for hanging out with us on the Found podcast. I hope you're feeling encouraged and excited to step into everything God has for you. Don't forget to follow and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. And if today's show encouraged you, please share it with friends and give us a shout out on social media. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.